Commercialization of agriculture took place. Sir, subsistence ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು, ಕಮರ್ಷಿಯಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು? ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್ ನೋಡ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಕಥೆ ಬರ್ದಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಹೊರತು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕೀವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದೇ ಇರಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ಯಾಟರ್ನ್ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಅಂಡ್ ವಿಲಿಯಂ ಎಚ್ ವೈಸರ್ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಯುಪಿ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನು ಬರಿದೆ, ಹೌ ಆರ್ ಯು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರಿಂಗ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್? ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ರಿಜಿಡಿಟಿ ಆದಾಗ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಬ್ರಾಹ್ಮಣ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಕ್ಷತ್ರಿಯಾಸ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು ಗೋ ಫಾರ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಟೆಲಿಂಗ್, whereas ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಯಾರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು? It has been given by the Shudras or the untouchables. And this complete system we call it as Jajmani system. We call it as Jajmani system. Okay. Now the first and foremost one, we call it as the Jajmani system. Now think that now in our rural, now if you take an example of India, now India now India, it has been divided into what? Divided into two things. One we call it as rural and the second one we call it as urban. Now 70% of India, according to 2011 census prakara nodadadre, according to 2011 census 60-40 ಇದೆ. It is 60% are present in where? 60% are present in, we call it as, it is rural India, whereas rest 40% are present in where? Are present in, we call it as urban areas. Okay, now it is 40% comes from urban, whereas rural in the 60%. Whereas I can say Karnataka nodadadre, Karnataka is 8% rural in idare. It is only, we call it as how many percentage? It is approximate nodadadre, it is the 61%. Rest we call it as approximately 38% change. 38% change comes from, we call it as urban areas. Or else general nodadre, it is 60-40 or 70-30 yav beka barkoli ashte, because it is continuously changing. Now sir, now iga it is rural nodadadre, it is rural nodadadre. Now in the traditional rural societies, what type of, in traditional, in the traditional, I'm talking about traditional, be cautious here, in the traditional rural societies, and the second one we call it as in the modern rural societies, what type of activity we are seeing? It is in the rural areas. It is, yeah, what type of economic activity? It is in both the times we are seeing what? It is agriculture as the main occupation. Agriculture as the main occupation. Even in traditional Tamil kuda, it is, our focus was on agriculture, but this agriculture was not based on the, it is market demand. Understand my word here. It is eradu kadenu agriculture ittu, but I can say traditional agriculture was based on subsistence economy. Traditional agriculture was based on subsistence. What do you mean by subsistence? The self-sustaining, nothing but the self-sustaining agriculture sector was prevalent in the rural areas. Nothing but traditional method. It is rural methods. We had a concept called as the subsistence. We had a subsistence, whereas in modern times, we call it as the commercialization of agriculture took place. Commercialization of agriculture took place. Sir, subsistence andreno, commercialization of agriculture andreno. Big name? It is commercialization based on demand and supply. Based on the demand and supply, we used to go for agriculture. Whereas il nodadadre, the subsistence based economic activity majorly based on, we call it as self-reliance. Majorly based on the self-reliance. Majorly based on self-reliance. Now sir, is self-reliance andandre, now will that be majorly for export or majorly for the consumption of my own, the rural economy? It is majorly based on a consumption of my rural economy. Now rural economy consumption agbeku antandre, does it mean that all the people were involved in agriculture, or only few are involved in agriculture and others used to be distributed? Hingagtitu. ಈಗ ನೋಡಿ, that is subsistence, okay alva? Now subsistence time ali, it is few people are involved in what? Are involved in agriculture, and a few people are, we call it as, they were receiving this agricultural product, and that interaction, what interaction? The social and the economic interaction between the two important communities. One we call it as agricultural class, and the second one we call it as the dependent class or the working class ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. It is a socio-economic. Be cautious here. It is socio also. Sir, ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಸರ್ socio ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, because both the caste people, they are, I can say, interdependent, and that we call it social. And economical ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು? Economical ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ for meeting the food needs of the working class, they are dependent on whom? They are dependent on agricultural class. And such a type of economic activity, we call it as it is subsistence. Now sir, is subsistence economy, it is, I can say, they are being divided into two things. One we call it agriculture class, and agriculture class na yenta karitivi, it is Jajman. Agriculture class, it is called as Jajman, and the working class we call it as yenta karitivi, Kamin. The working class we call it as a Kamin. Now this Jajman, he is also called as patron anta. Enike patron? He is acting as a, we call it as, it's a guardian. He is acting as a guardian for yarge? For the working class. Adukoskara avrna enanta karitivi, the patron anta kuda karitivi, the patron. Now sir, now ivrge agricultural food items kodtara kodalva ivaru? Nothing but it is, the food is being provided for by the shelter, for by employment is being provided to yarge? Employment is being provided to the Kamin. Now ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಕಾಮಿನ್ಗೆ? Now ಈ ಫುಡ್, ಶೆಲ್ಟರ್, ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರಾ, or in return ಇವ್ರು ಏನಾದ್ರು ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾ? In return they need to provide something, and what is that in return? In return we call it as the service. In return we call it as the service anta. What type of the service is being provided here? Now the different types of services are being provided by the different caste people. Different services are being provided by the different caste people. Iga madike madon en martane illi, it is automatically he'll give you, or he'll give pottery to the Yajman. The second one, the blacksmith will provide en martara avaru. Automatically they'll provide the equipments to the agriculture. It is ulo negili ella, it is negil agirbodu, or different agriculture machineries are being provided by yaru? This Kamin or the working class. And the third one, even example kodi, it is one who is involved in, I can say, the barber. He automatically will provide what service? Nothing but haircut to the agricultural class. Yes or no? Now this agricultural class, we call it as Jajman, or he is also called as Jajman anta karithim. He is also called as Jajman. And this complete interrelationship between the patron and the Kamin, the interrelationship between the patron and the Kamin, related to what? Related to the socio-economic. The socio-economic aspect, we call it as Jajmani system. This continuous interaction between the agricultural class and the working class, or the patron class and the Kamin class, and it is working based on a system, based on a process, and that based on process we call it as Jajmani system. Now sir, the Jajmani system has been given for the first time in which year? The Jajmani system has been given in the year 1936 only. Jajmani system has been provided in the year 1936 while studying about the Uttar Pradesh agricultural societies. This has been given by William H. Weiser anta karitivi. William H. Weiser. ಇದನ್ನ ಬರೀದೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಬರಲ್ಲ. ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಕಥೆ ಪುರಾಣ ಬರೀತಾರೆ, ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಇದು ಅಂತ, without using a keywords, without using a pattern, without using a Jajman, without using common word, it is you will never get good marks. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ for the first time the concept has been given by ಯಾರು? The first time the concept has been given by William Weiser in which year? In the year 1936. in the year 1936, while studying about which societies? It is Uttar Pradesh agricultural societies. Agricultural societies, and this Jajmani system is unique to India. This Jajmani system is unique to India. Unique to India ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. Okay, ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತು ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ. It is the Jajmani system. Now Jajmani system. It is understand ಅದಾದ ನಾನು ಬರ್ತೀನಿ. It is Jajmani system. We call it as Jajmani system. It is a interrelationship between the agricultural class and the working class, related to the social and economic related aspects. We call it as Jajmani system. And the concept of Jajmani system has been provided by Yaro. Has been provided by William H. Weiser in which year? In the year 1936, while studying about, I can say, Uttar Pradesh agricultural societies. Majorly the Jat societies study madbekadre, he has given a concept called as, we call it as Jajmani system. Jajmani system is the interrelation between agriculture or the dominant class and we call it as common. Yes. Now, first one. The second one. Now, sir, it is the Jajmani system. Will there be money economy or will there be barter economy? It is the mandatory Jajmani system exists. There are two major important conditions. That condition should satisfy me. And that condition we call it as first two. It is our economy should be mandatory. It is barter system relevant. Money will I work with the Jajman? No, I'll go outside my this traditional occupation. Second one, this I can say interaction is hereditary in nature. This interaction should be what? Hereditary. Hereditary andre? It is appaninda magange, maganida momagange atara. Yes or no? It is hereditary in nature. Yes or no? Hereditary in nature. Now these two conditions should be mandatory for the existence of Jajmani system. But nodi, ee veredu weakening agadke karana enu? Or it is to reduce the Jajmani system. What's the main, I can say, reason for this? What is the main reason? The main reason here is introduction of money. And the second one we call it as a breakdown of hereditary occupation. If we do breakdown adaga, will there be interrelation between the Jajman and the common? No, automatically nagathe. It is, we call it as Jajmani system has been disintegrated in the present times. We are seeing only the remnants. We are not seeing the Jajmani system in the present times. Jajmani system in the present times. Okay, now. Yes, overall. Now, is Jajmani system is it good or bad? Now, good and good and first, how it is good? Jajmani system, how it is good? It is first and foremost one, self-sufficiency. Nothing but self-sufficiency, and the different economic classes are dependent on the other. It gives rise to what? Harmony. For example, madke madono agriculture mein depend agidre, agriculture madke madono mein depend agidre, will there be conflict or will there be it is cooperation? Cooperation. Second, and the third one, if the occupation is hereditary, don't you think I can conserve the traditional knowledge also? If it is hereditary, then automatically I can go for what? I can say practicing of, we call it as, it is my traditional skills, the traditional knowledge. Traditional skills as well as the traditional knowledge. The third advantage. Fourth, online passes. Yes, Jajmani was taking care of the common. Nothing but protection kortidru. Nothing but they used to provide the protection to the, we call it as commons. Exactly, perfect. Online, exactly. Mega, exactly, yes. Dasmita, yes. Okay. Okay, Alvam. Yes, this is about our positives. Negatives, coding. Jajmani system negatives or the challenges of Jajmani system. It is first and foremost one, there is no social mobility. Now, the second one, don't you think, caste has been legalized and caste hierarchy has been rigid now. It is a rigid caste system. Mobility becomes, I can say, banned, or I can say mobility becomes rigid. Agadela. Third, automatically this Yajman or the Jajman, will it treat this common in a, it is, I can say, equal manner, or will it start to exercise discrimination? or will he start to exploit? Will he start to underpay? Or don't you think he'll be working as a bonded labor rather than working in the interest of his own family? All such are negatives. Okay, alva? Yes, one of no in Nivel and I have given all the ideas. But the first kind of foremost blueprint, first one we call it as the introduction. The first one we call it as the introduction. Now, introduction includes the three important things. One we call it as definition. The second one we call it as uniqueness. Perfect. The third one we call it as the stats or the facts or examples. Now, definition begin. What's the definition here? It is the socio-economic system. It's a socio-economic system which existed in which society? The traditional rural society, boss. Was it present in urban? No. Was it present in modern rural societies? Modern rural illa. At the same time, urban look kuda illa. If that is the case, don't you think I need to talk about the traditional, the rural society, the socio-economic, the system which is present in, we call it as traditional rural society. And the third one we call it as interaction. Interaction between yaru? Interaction between the upper class and the lower class communities. Upper class and the lower caste communities. Now, upper caste nahi kariti. It is upper caste na we'll call it as Jajmani anta. Kelidira? It is Jajmani, or we call it as the patron, or we call it as the patron, and the lower caste people. The lower caste people. Now, lower caste people, we call it as the common. We call it as the common. Now, this common and Tandre common is also called as what? The common, we call it as, it is the service providers. The common, we call it as the service, the providers. Whereas, Jajmani or patron, your work is nothing but their work is agriculture, practicing of agriculture. They are normally landlords. Normally, they are landlords. And when you are working in this land, we call it as common. When you are working in the land, we call it as the commons. Okay, na? Doubt illa tha Paka? Okay. The second one bagan ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ stats ನೋಡೋದು ಅದನ್ನು uniqueness ನೋಡೋಣ. Now, with respect to stats ನೋಡೋದಾದ್ರೆ, now what is stats here? Now, stats ಏನು ಬರೆಯೋದಿಲ್ಲಿ? The concept of Jajmani has been given by yaru? It is William H. Weiser. It is William H. Weiser. ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಸತಿ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್ ನೋಡ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕಥೆ ಬರ್ದಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಹೊರತು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕೀವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದೇ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಪ್ಯಾಟರ್ನ್ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಅಂತ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಅಂಡ್ ವಿಲಿಯಂ ಎಚ್ ವೈಸರ್ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಯುಪಿ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಬರ್ದಿರಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನು ಬರೀದೆ, ಹೌ ಆರ್ ಯು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರಿಂಗ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್? ಕಥೆ ಬರೆಯೋದು. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಇಂಟರ್ ರಿಲೇಷನ್ ಬಿಟ್ವೀನ್, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಐ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸೇ ಅಪರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್, ಲೋವರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್. ನಾವು ಅಪರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಲೋವರ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಯು ಥಿಂಕ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತೈಸೇಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಕೂಡ ಕರಿತೀವಿ ಅದನ್ನು, ಆರ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರ್ ಅದು. In reality, it is not called as Jajmani system or Jajman. Hodo ilo? Yes, William H. Weiser. This concept has been given by Yavaga, 1936, while studying about the UP agricultural societies. UP agricultural societies or rural caste-based, I can say, the agricultural societies. The rural, the traditional agricultural caste societies. ಏನಾದ್ರು ಒಂದೆರಡು ಬರೆದ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು, ಬಟ್ ವಿಲಿಯಂ ವೈಸರ್ ಅಂತೂ ಪಕ್ಕ ಇರಲೇಬೇಕು ನನಗೆ. Yes, done. Second one. The third one we call it as, what is the uniqueness about? What is the uniqueness about? We call it as Jajmani system. Uniqueness of Jajmani ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು? Nothing but Jajmani itself is unique to India. Hope you're getting it. It is Jajmani system. Can we see this type of Jajmani system outside India? No. Nothing but this Jajmani itself is unique to India. Unique to India ಅಂತ. Yes, sir, ನನಗೆ ಇದು ಇಷ್ಟ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ you can talk about it is Jajmani system works on two major important ideologies. One we call it as hereditary and the second one we call it as what? Barter system. Works on barter and hereditary system. Barter as well as hereditary. Okay now. Yes or no? Barter as well as hereditary system ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. Yes, perfect. Okay now. Anand, I hope it is clear now at least. The next one we call it as ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ? ಡೌಟಾ? ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಹೇಳು. ಹಾ ಸರ್ ಹೇಳಿ ನೋಡಿದೀರಾ? ಹೌದು, ಮೊದಲೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಹೇರ್ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ ಬರ್ತಿದ್ದಾಗ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಅಕ್ಕಿ ಕಾಳೆಲ್ಲ ಕೊಡ್ತೀರಿ ಇನ್ ರಿಟರ್ನ್, ಹೌದಾ ಇಲ್ವೋ? ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಹಿ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು ಹ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ ಆಲ್ ದ ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್. ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ. ಬಟ್ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇದರ್ ಐ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸಿ ದ ರಾಗಿನೋ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದವಸ ಧಾನ್ಯನೋ ಏನ್ ದಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ, ಇನ್ನೇನ್ ಬೇರೆ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮಡಿಕೆ ಮಾಡೋರು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಇರ್ತಿದ್ರು. ನಾವು ಕುಮಾರ್ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಎಲ್ಲಾರ ಮನೆಗೂ ಮಡಿಕೆ ಕೊಡೋರು. ಎಲ್ಲಾರ ಮನೆಗೂ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಒನ್ ಆರ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಲಾರ್ಡ್ಸ್. ಬಟ್ ಇನ್ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಏನ್ ತಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ರು? It is nothing but ragi, or I can say as simple as that, it is for the sustenance. ಏನ್ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ, ಬೇಳೆ ಕಾಳು ಅವೆಲ್ಲ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಬಟ್ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ 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 ನಿಮ್ ಚೈಲ್ಡ್ ಹುಡ್ ದುಡ್ಡು ನೋಡಿರ್ತೀರ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ 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 ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅವ್ರು ರಾಗಿ ಬೇಡ ಅನ್ನೋರು, ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅಂತ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ it is by now, it is by then, it is the monetized, or I can say the money system as I can say evolved. But in reality, Jajmani ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನೋಡೋದಾದ್ರೆ, without market economy or without, we call it as money system. Without money system, we call it as the barter. It works on the barter economies. Yes. The second one we call it as as a factor. ಇನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ತೀವಿ ಕೆಲವು ಬಾರ್ಡರ್, ಐ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸೇ ಬಾರ್ಡರ್ ವಿಲೇಜಸ್ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನು ಬಾರ್ಟರ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇದೆ. ಬಟ್ ಆದ್ರೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಇನ್ ಅ ಡಿಸ್ಇಂಟಿಗ್ರೇಟೆಡ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್. ಇವಾಗ ಕೂಡ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಆ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗೆ ಬಸ್ಸೇ ಇಲ್ಲ, ರೋಡೇ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಆತರ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಬಟ್ ಪಕ್ಕಾ ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ವೈ? ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ಆಕ್ಯುಪೇಷನಲ್ ಡೈವರ್ಸಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್, ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ nothing but there is conservation of what? It is social structures, and that conservation of social structures in the traditional rural economies we call it as Jajmani system ಅಂತ. ಓಕೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ? ನಾವು ಈ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಬರೆಯೋಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮುಂಚೆ ಈ ಡಯಾಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಬರ್ದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ. ನಾವು ಎಕ್ಸಾಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಡಯಾಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಬರೀಬೇಕೀಗ. ಡಯಾಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಇಷ್ಟ ಕತೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಬರ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಡಯಾಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಬರೀಬೇಕು. ನಾವು ಡಯಾಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ವಾಟ್? ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಟೂ ಕ್ಲಾಸಸ್. ಯಾರಪ್ಪ ಟೂ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ? one we call it as agricultural class. And the second one we call it as working class. ಹೌದಾ ಇಲ್ವೋ? working class. Now this agriculture used to provide ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? Used to provide all the benefits. What all the benefits andre? The food, the shelter. It is food, the shelter, employment ಕೊಡ್ತಿದ್ರು. but in return this working class used to provide what? Perfect services. Okay alva? Now this working class we call it as the common, and agricultural class we call it as the patron or yajman or jajman anta karithivi, or jajman. And this complete system we call it as Jajmani system. anta. Okay alva? This diagram explaining about yadra ಬಗ್ಗೆ? It is Jajmani system. ಮುಗಿತು. ಇದೊಂದು ಹಾಕಿದ್ರೆ you will get more marks. But the most expected question is this. ಕೇಳಬೇಕು. ಬಟ್ 3 ವರ್ಷದಲ್ಲೂ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಓದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ ಜನ. ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಥಿಂಕಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್ ಈ ವರ್ಷ ಕೊಡಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ, ಅದೇನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ KPSC ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಏನ್ ಗೊತ್ತು? ನೀವು ಅದೇ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ತಾನೆ. ಎಸ್ ಆರ್ ನೋ? ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಒಂದು ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿನಾ? ಓಕೆ, ಜಾಜ್ಮಾನಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಜಮಾನಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್. ಎಸ್ ಆರ್ ನೋ? ಆಲ್ ರೈಟ್. Yes, this border and a diagram. And the next one we call it as the factors. Now, what factors led to the it is Jajmani system? In factors, appa. What factors led to the Jajmani system? First, at the first one we call it as the social hierarchies. Perfect, yes. Baribodu. It is the first one we call it as the first one from social perspective in the other. We call it as the social hierarchy. It is not Varna system, rather we call it as caste system. Now, Varna system, there is no concept of Jajmani system. It is Yavaga caste evolve Vaitala, Avaginda, nothing but origination of, we call it as origination of Jajmani system took place. One is, yes, perfect. Second factor, it is lack of diversity with respect to occupation, or can I say lack of industrialization, urbanization, modernization? Yes, it is. Second one, we call it as lack of social change. Lack of the change. One is caste-based division or social hierarchy, and the second one we call it as lack of social change leads to the existence of traditional Jajmani system. Traditional Jajmani system. The third, ಈಗ ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕು, ನಾನು ಬರೀ ಇಂಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಷ್ಟೇ. ಫಾರಿನ್ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಹೆಂಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾ? They won't teach. Foreign they won't teach, rather they give you ideas. But ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಪೋಸಿಟ್. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಇವರ ಟೀಚರ್ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? ಟೀಚ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. But that we call it as, that's the difference between rote learning and innovation. Innovation ಯಾವಾಗ ಬರುತ್ತೆ? If you give some ideas, automatically they need to think and they need to attempt. ಹೇಳಿ ಪಟಂತ್, ಈಗ ನೀವು US ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ಎಲ್ಲಿದ್ದೀರಾ ನೋಡಿ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಹೇಳಿ ಈಗ ಪಟಂತ. It is dominance of upper caste, or can I say it is dominant caste system. It is India we have Jats. It is the Jats idare. Adadmele it is, we call it as the Kammars, Marathas. Nam Karnatakadalli it is the Okkaligas, the Lingayats. They're acting as what? They're acting as Yajman, or they're acting as Gaudas of the village. Nothing but because of dominant caste system. Dominant caste system. The next fourth one. The fourth one we call it as lack of money also. Nothing but lack of money, or can I say it is because of existence of barter system. Barter system andre? It is exchange of goods for in return. Exchange of goods in return the services, or it can be goods also. It is barter system. Okay, majorly these are the factors which leads to the formation of, we call it as Jajmani system. Jajmani, the system. The third one we call it as the history or origin of, we call it as Jajmani system. History of Jajmani, the system. Now with respect to evolution and the Keldaga, you should divide your answer into three parts. One is ancient, medieval, and modern. In case modern colonial and post-colonial, or we call it as the post-independence, or we call it as it is the modern, the pre-modern and post-modern. Anciently, now where was the origination of Jajmani system? Begin. It is Pakai evidence. Evidence? No. It is the origination of, we call it as Jajmani system took place after later Vedic period. Now when the Varna system became rigid, allinda shuru agutte. It is, we call it as the origination took place in later Vedic period. We call it as the later Vedic period. The history or origin of Jajmani system again, the ancient roots, or we call it as the Jajmani system can be traced back to the it is later Vedic period where there is a rigidity of caste system took place. Nothing but caste system rigidity adaga. Nothing but Brahmin or the Kshatriyas used to go for agriculture tilling, whereas service yaar korta idru. It has been given by the Shudras or the untouchables. And that interaction or the interrelationship between the, I can say, higher caste and the lower caste related to social and economic perspective, we call it as Jajmani system. Jajmani system, but ill origin agate anta kelidre. It is origin took place in the later Vedic period. Later Vedic period as an origination of, we call it as Jajmani system. But medieval timely, when the feudal lords, I can say, originated, when feudalism originated, feudalism and reign. It is when there is an origination of landlords. Don't you think the, I can say, Jajmani system, will it become strengthened or will it start to degrade? It will start to strengthen. Nothing but during medieval period only, it is, I can say, origin of the feudal lords. Sir, feudal lords and ಏನು ಸರ್ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ landlords. When the landlords originated, major ಆಗಿ ನೋಡೋದಾದ್ರೆ, it is, we call it as the strengthening. The strengthening of, we call it as the strengthening of what? The strengthening of Jajmani system took place. The strengthening of the Jajmani system took place. The third one, during colonial times, will the Jajmani system start to evolve or will it start to degrade? Think mind and get degrade agate antandre how? Or Christianity, or as simple as an introduction of monetary alva, or we call it as money has been introduced by Britishers. And the second one we call it as British policies. And what policies? Land related policies. Nothing but land related policies, which include which include Zamindari system, which include Raitwari system, which includes Mahalwari system. Nothing but tax collection is directly with the help of what? With the help of the people, or with the help of farmers, or with the help of community. And that led to what? That led to, we call it as degradation of Jajmani system took place. Degradation of Jajmani system took place. Okay na? But ade post independence admele ಮತ್ತೆ increase agata decrease agata? It is further decrease. Why further decrease? Because of, we call it, because of industrialization, because of urbanization, because of reservation policies, because of bonded labor abolition acts. Yes or no? Because of all the different affirmative actions, it is the further declining of, we call it as Jajmani system took place. Or Jajmani system idru kuda existed in what form? Modified form. Existed in what form? Modified form. Existed in modified versions. Okay na? Yes. Artha ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ? Yes or no? It is during colonial times, because of British land policies, British land related policies. And the second one, it is introduction of the money. Introduction of money has brought what changes? It is degradation of Jajmani system took place. Degradation of Jajmani system took place. Sir, Jajmani system is basically described with respect to barter system or owner-server policy. Same alva, barter system or owner-server policy, both are same. Yes, it is exam money, we can agatan, and this, I can say, the further degraded by the government's affirmative policies. The government's affirmative policies. Affirmative policies yadu anta. ನನ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲದ ಹೇಳಿ ನೀವು ನೋಡೋಣ, ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ದೇ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. It is Land Reforms Act of which year? 1961, 1974. All the things Land Reforms Act. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ constitutional provisions with respect to reservation, concept of reservation. Article 17, abolition of untouchability. Abolition of bonded labor. Article 23, ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. Yes or no? Third, it is bonded labor acts. Bonded labor act. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ it is prevention of, we call it as the prevention of SC atrocities act of 1989. SC atrocities act of 1989. All this comes under where? All this comes under affirmative actions which have been taken up by the government, which led to the reduction in what? Reduction or degradation in the Jajmani system. Nothing but which led to the reduction with respect to what? The degradation of the Jajmani system. Degradation of Jajmani system anta. Okay na? Yes, this with respect to your Jajmani system anta. Clear? ಬರಿಬೋದಲ್ವಾ? ಈಸಿನ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ, ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ? ಎಸ್, ಇನ್ ಮಿಕ್ಕಿದ ನೀವು ಬರ್ಕೋತೀರಾ? ಸೈಲೆಂಟ್ ಫೀಚರ್ಸ್, ಪಾಸಿಟಿವ್ಸ್, ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ಸ್ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಮಾತಾಡಲ್ಲ. It is the salient features. Now, what are the salient features or characteristic features of Jajmani? Some 34 points ಹೇಳಿ ನೋಡೋಣ ಪಟ್ಪಡಂತ. First and foremost one, perfect. The first and foremost one, it is the self-sufficient societies. Correct? Self-sufficient societies. Now, why self-sufficient societies? Because there is what? There is cooperation between the caste. Because there is the cooperation between the different caste people. Different caste andre upper caste and lower caste. Upper caste and the lower caste. Okay na? Second, illa features. First of all, ide bariyangilla. Second one we call it as, it is the relationship is based on what? Based on caste roles or based on caste hierarchy. It is based on caste and how they know. It's upper caste and lower caste. Don't you think it is based on hierarchy? And the third one we call it as, this Jajmani system is hereditary in nature. And the fourth one we call it as, it exists via the barter system. And the fifth one we call it as, is this Jajmani system rigid or flexible? Rigid nature. All these are the 5 important characteristic features of Jajmani system. Okay now, the second one we call it as, it is caste-based hierarchy. Caste-based hierarchy. Now, caste-based hierarchy andre, what is caste-based hierarchy? Nothing but division of what? It is division of, we call it as, I can say, social and economic aspects between the upper caste and the lower caste. Upper caste and the lower caste people. Caste-based hierarchies. Caste-based hierarchy. And the third one, don't you think the Jajmani system, it is hierarchical in nature? 3, it is hereditary in nature. It is hereditary. Hierarchical jotege, it is hereditary also. What is hereditary? It is occupation is passed from one generation to the other. It is the occupation, the traditions, the culture is being transferred from one generation to the other. One generation to, we call it as other and the karitivi. One generation to, we call it as the other. And the fourth one, does this economy have, I can say, monetary or money, or is it based on, I can say, it is barter system? It is barter. Now, barter system, such societies are mutual independent or mutual dependent. It is mutual dependent on each other. Mutual dependent on each other. Mutual dependent on each other between the Jajman and Kamen. Between the Jajman and Kamen. Exactly, Megha. It is based on hierarchy. Yes. Smita, yes, perfect. Okay, it is based on mutual dependency. Mutual dependency. Now, this complete, I can say, system, is it flexible or rigid in nature? It is rigid. Nothing but they follow rigid practices. They follow rigid practices. Now, rigidity and tandre, we call it as social rigidity. Nothing but what? Nothing but we call it as social mobility is hampered. The social mobility is hampered. Social rigidity comes with lesser social mobility. Comes with lesser social mobility. Okay now. Yes or no? Artha agtideya? Yes. Okay, this is about our, we call it as the salient features. Eagerly put on the positives, negatives. The positives and negatives. Now, positives of Jajmani system. What are the positives of Jajmani system? The first and the foremost one. Don't you think harmonious societies can be established? Now, how harmonious societies can be established? With more of dependency between the caste. More of dependency between the caste. Yes or no? Yes, for example, alge odiar agirbodu, or it can be with respect to a PP uttaralla, auru hair cutters, or it can be with respect to it is any occupation. They are being dependent on what? It's agricultural economy. Other agricultural societies, they also depend on blacksmiths. They also depend on hair cutters. They depend on pottery makers. They depend on different occupations. And that dependency, don't you think, gives rise to the social harmony? Yes or no? If you halli kada hodre, see, there'll be, I can say, different caste people who are living in a villages. But problem eno sir anta kelidre, problem eno anta kelidre, social mobility is hampered. Because bere caste na in madhya agangu illa. Nothing but marriage has been prohibited, and the second one, inculcation of the cultures have been prohibited, social mobility is prohibited. Again, that comes from where? Okay, now, first one we call it as, first one, because of Jajmani system, it is, we call it as, the social harmony is being established because of dependency between the Jajman and the Kamen, or the working class and it is, we call it as the landlord class. Because of landlord class and the working class, dependency will start to increase. The second one really put it is cultural preservation will start to take place. The cultural preservation or the preservation of skills will take place. The cultural preservation or the protection and conservation of skills will take place among the different caste people. Among the different caste people. Negative point. It is social harmony again. Now, what will be the negative? It is social rigidity. Nothing but social mobility is being prohibited. It is social mobility is being prohibited. How do you know? At least you have How do you know? Are you in a position to remember all such, I can say, issues? Yes. Okay, you will be a good administrator. Why are we studying this? Nothing but we will decide. Now, yavado one caste people bandru kuda, we'll take decisions based on, it is a data based on rationality, based on merit of the case, and based on the vulnerability, based on development also. Yavaga, if you are well aware about the issues, well aware about the social discrimination, well aware about what? Yes or no? The biggest issue we are seeing in the present times we call it as subcategorization of SC. Yes or no? It is a subcategorization nodi. Our report barli eshtu galata agata nodi. Nothing but it is rich are becoming richer since 1950s in the. Nothing but only few castes. Only few castes are becoming richer, whereas the rest castes are being deprived. Now, why are you going for discrimination again? Don't you think you being in such, I can say, higher position, don't you think you need to uplift them? Rather than uplifting, you're subjugating them within the caste. ಅದೇ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಇಡೀ ಶತ್ರುಗಳು ಯಾರು ಅಲ್ಲ, ನಿಮ್ಮವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ ಶತ್ರುಗಳು. Yes or no? See, the biggest threat to women empowerment is women itself. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ the biggest, I can say, threat to the, I can say, caste system is caste itself. I'm not saying only SC, ST, it is all the castes. It's OBC really, OBC ಕೂಡ ಹಾಗೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ it is the majority share is being captured by ಯಾರು? It is the larger OBCs. And later on with this, we have came out with a concept called as creamy layer concept. Creamy layer, the concept of. Yes or no? At least we are bringing in some change. ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ changes ತರ್ತಿದ್ವಿ SC, ST ಕೂಡ. That's a good move. That's a good move which has been taken up by both the governments as well as judiciary in such initiatives. But ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ we need to move towards, we call it as creamy layer concept. ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಕೊಡೋದಲ್ಲ, nothing but creamy layer ಕೊಡಿ. One who are earning more than 8 lakh rupees, it is remove them from the, it is concept of reservation. Yes, and all such things comes when you are well aware about the concepts, well aware about the issues, well aware about the, it is the principles. Yes or no? See, you should not take decisions based on your own interest. Self-interest ಮೇಲೆ decision ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದಿಲ್ಲಿ. Rather you need to take decision based on, it is underdevelopment or based on data. Yes? Okay, ಅಲ್ವಾ? Second one, it is the skills and culture protect ಆಗತ್ತೆ. But don't you think that leads to negative ಏನಾಗತ್ತೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ? It is, we call it as, my right of occupational diversity will get, I can say, hampered. ಈ ಗುರು ನನಗೆ ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಕ್ ನಂಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಬಟ್ ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಪ್ಪ ಇದೇ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮಡಿಕೆ ಮಾಡು ನೀನ್ ಸೂಪರ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಾಡ್ತೀಯ ಅಂತ. ಹೌದಾ ಇಲ್ವೋ? Now if my, I can see, it is hereditary, if they are saying that it is ನಮ್ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಇದು ಲಾಂಗ್ ಇಂದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ, don't you think even I have a right also to practice my diverse occupation, and that is being hampered as a part of your Jajmani system. Nothing but occupational diversity is being hampered. It is, we call it as occupational diversity gets hampered. Occupational diversity gets hampered. The third one, ಏನಪ್ಪ third positive? So okay, one is social harmony, culture and skills, and the third one we call it as the self-sufficient economy, the self-sufficiency with respect to food, self-sufficiency with respect to the food. challenges ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ ಬೇಗನೆ? what is the challenge? The challenge here is, it is, we call it as exploitation of the downtrodden people. Exploitation, it is underpaid, it is exploitation, bonded labor, the labor for by underpaid or sometimes unpaid also. Underpaid or sometimes unpaid also. That leads to what? That leads to, we call it as the exploitation of the, we call it as downtrodden people will take place. The fourth advantage of Jajmani system, the fourth advantage of Jajmani system, we call it as, it is, we call it as, the fourth one, nothing but we call it as division of labor is taking place here. Nothing but each and every caste has been allocated a particular occupation. Nothing but division of labor. Now this division of labor leads to what? Division of labor leads to the, it is, we call it as hereditary nature. This challenge ಏನಿರ್ಬೋದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ? It is hereditary. Now hereditary ಆದ್ರೆ problem ಏನಿಲ್ಲಿ? Problem here is, my occupational diversity is being the curtailed. My occupational diversity is being, I can say, curtailed. Rather than being independent, I will be dependent on what? I will be dependent on the, it is, we call it as Jajman or Ejman. Jajman or Ejman. Yes or no? Yes, all these are the positives as well as negatives. Now, sir, is Jajmani system showing any, it is the changes in the present times? It is Jajmani system decline ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ? Decline ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ರೆ what are the reasons for change? What are the reasons for the change in Jajmani system? ಏನಪ್ಪ ಚೇಂಜು? ನಾವು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣಗಳೇನು? At the first and the foremost one, we call it as the first and the foremost one, we call it as the first constitution ಬರೆಯೋಣ, ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ legislations ಬರೆಯೋಣ, ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ we'll talk about influence. ಅದೇ influence ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಓಕೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ? Now constitutional provisions ಯಾವುದು ಸರ್ which is leading to change? ಬೇಗ ಹೇಳಿ, ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿರೋದನ್ನ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೇಳಿ. Exactly, I've included online specialization, lack of individualism. Yes, there is no freedom for decision making. Diversity in occupation is not encouraged. Yes, encouraging of the caste discrimination. Perfect. Yes, elaborate. Constitutionalism or constitution, another first and foremost one, we call it as Article 17 and Article 23. Article 17 and Article 23. In method, Article 17. Abolition of untouchability, and 23 talks about what? The forced labor begar, or it is also called as begar. The forced labor or begar, beggar Allah, begar. It is BEGAR, double G Allah, double G andre bhikshe bidoru. It is begar andre it is nothing but the forced labor, or we call it as jeetದ ಆಳುಗಳು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಕೇಳಿದಿರಾ? jeetದ ಆಳುಗಳು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ we call it as the forced labor, and they are being abolished. Prevention la be cautious here. ಇವೆರಡು abolish ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲಿ. Now it is prevention abolishing a difference. Prevention ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ, but abolition ಅಂದ್ರೆ zero ತನ್ನಿ, eliminate ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. Yes, abolition of untouchability, abolition of we call it as forced labor. Second ಇದು ಬಿಟ್ಟು it is concept of reservations. Now article ಹೇಳಿ. Article 15, 16, Article 15, 16, Article 15, Article 16, Article 330, Article 332. Article 15 talks about education, educational reservation, education. 15 talks about employment. 330 talks about Lok Sabha. It is 332 talks about legislative assembly. Do reservation have in upper houses? Rajya Sabha and state legislative councils only? No, it is no reservations in upper houses. No reservation in upper house. Yes, first one is this. Okay, alva. Because of the things we have brought in, it is, or there is a change that has been brought in with respect to our traditional social structure called as Jajmani system. And what are the different legislative principles we have? Maybe what are the different legislative provisions we have? The first and foremost one we call it as the Land Reforms Act. It is the Land Reforms Act. But nam Karnataka Land Reforms Act anta nododadre we have two major important acts. One we call as it is 1961 and 1974. Now which one is more successful? 1974 1974 it is more successful. Why? Because of more political willingness during the longest serving chief minister. He said the budget bandre Siddaramaiah will overtake it is, we call it as yarna, it is Devarajaras also. But no, it is 1974, it is the Devraj Aras. Now Devraj Aras was the chief minister for how many years? Continuous again. How many years? It is in and around 8 years, 8 to 9 years. But either complete madadre automatically Siddaramaiah will become it is largest served. But the level is 1974 only. It is Uluvavane Bhumiya Odeya Anta. Nothing but the land, I can say the reforms has been brought in. It is land reforms under it is Zamindari has been abolished, landlords has been abolished. Second one we call it as the tenants are being provided the rights. We call it as the tiller is the owner of the land anta. And the third one we call it as land ceiling has been brought in. The This is the biggest reforms which has been brought in the form of, we call it as a legislative provisions to abolish what? To abolish the traditional inequality with respect to land. Traditional inequality with respect to land. First one, I second one, really. Second one, we call it as the Bonded Labor Abolition Act 1976. Bonded Labor Abolition Act. The third one, it is the SC/ST Atrocities Prevention Act of क्या year? No, total bar ನನಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ 1989. 1989. Yes or no? Yes. 1989. And especially when we are getting reservation, ತೊದಲಂಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರು. Yes or no? At least you should know the rights ಅಲ್ವಾ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಏನು ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಅದೇ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಇಷ್ಟು ಓದಿ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಪಾಪ ಹಳ್ಳಿ ಕಡೆ ಏನು ಓದಿರಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನು ಗೊತ್ತಿರುತ್ತೆ. Yes or no? Don't you think you need to teach them? Saying that ಓದಾಗ ಬಂದಾಗ ಹೇಳ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕು 1981 ಗೊತ್ತಾ 89 ಗೊತ್ತಾ ಅಂತ. 1989 ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ವಾ ಅದೋಗ್ಲಿ. It is the biggest and most controversial act under other. The most, I can say the most we call it as, we call it as stringent norms. At the same time, more misuse act under kuda other. SC/ST. It is only 3% conviction rate. ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. 3% conviction rate ಅಂದ್ರೆ nothing but misuse ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು. At the same time, because of force ನ ಕೂಡ FIR ನ withdraw ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರಬಹುದು. There are two possibilities. One is with force ತಗೊಳ್ಳಲ್ವೋ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಬದುಕ್ತಿಯಾ ನನ್ನ ಎದುರಾಕೊಂಡು ಅಂತ ಹಳ್ಳಿಲಿ literally I'm saying. And the first reason that can be reason, and second reason can be the fake or the misusing of the provisions can also taken place. ಎರಡಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಅಂಡ್ ಇದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಮಿಸ್ಯೂಸ್ ಯಾವ್ದಪ್ಪ ವುಮೆನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ it is Domestic Violence Act of 2005. It is, we call it as killing the Domestic Violence Act of 2005. The most I can say misuse ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದೇ. Yes or no? Yes, it is land reforms. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ Bonded Labor Act of 1976, 1970, the sixth. And the third one, SC/STs Atrocities Act of 1989. SC/STs Atrocities Act of 1989. Saku. And the next one, the influence. Now, because of influence, we have brought in, I can say Jajmani change anta. Yadado. And the concept of industrialization, the concept of urbanization, the concept of westernization, I can say we call it as the globalization, all these influences. Nothing but the concept of, we call it as industrialization, urbanization, modernization, globalization. And even influence of technology also. Influence of our technology also on the curriculum. Okay, Alvam. Yes, don't you think all this is easier and Arama handle ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಬರಿಬೋದು ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ. Yes, this is with respect to your the complete concept called as ಯಾವುದು Jajmani system.